As part of a challenge on a SeeMeCNC Facebook group, a users group, one of the members there put out a challenge to print this Maverick Skull, and it's a way of seeing what kind of quality we can come up with our SeeMeCNC printers. And this was the first time I printed it. This was on the new SeeMeCNC Artemis, and this was with some Robo 3D wood-colored PLA that I had laying around, and I just wanted to see what sort of a print I could come up with and what sort of issues I might have with supports and such. But this was just a test, and really what I wanted to do was to use this filament. And this filament is very different. This filament, aside from being gray, is Proto-Pasta Magnetic Iron filament. It actually has iron particles in it. So I've got a little ceramic magnet here, and you can see that the magnet sticks to it. So this is pretty cool, having filament that will be magnetic. But more importantly, the reason I got it is because I want to see about rusting the filament. And so one of the questions is going to be whether to rust the helmet, or rust the skull, or rust them both. So this was an interesting print, and I made some other videos that showed the progression of the print. And the filament is heavier than most because it got iron particles in it. So what I'm going to do is try to remove it from the bed and see how that works out. And then I'm going to weigh it, and I can compare it against the previous build. Let's see, this one may come up a little more stubborn than the last one. I've got Elmer's water-soluble glue on the bed to help with the adhesion, and it adhered pretty well. Just looking at it, though, this is a beautiful print. This was printed at 0.2 millimeters, 20 microns, and the finish here is incredible. You barely see any layer lines here. The only layer lines I'm seeing is at the very top. So this is really quite an interesting filament. I have to print it very slow, because if I tried printing it fast, the extruder was clicking. And so I spent some time experimenting with different print speeds and extrusion rates and things like that. I could switch over to this tool, which will probably give me a little more leverage, and it will come off. We're almost off. So the print is released, and what I want to see here is the weight of the print. So I'm going to get a scale here. Put down the scale. Put down all the little pieces here. Because this print is much heavier, probably at least 30% heavier than the PLA print. And so I'm getting 429 grams with the print and its support. This is compared to only 265 grams for the model printed in PLA, even though it had a denser infill. I was rightfully a little nervous about this print because the spool only contained 500 grams of filament. So at 400 and some odd grams of print and support, this was pretty close. And in fact, you can see that I'm starting to see the spool. I didn't have that much left. So I had no idea how much it was going to take, but I was watching the spool get lighter and lighter and lighter, but finally it did finish the print. But now it's time to remove the supports. And what I'll likely do is speed up the video from time to time. I had a little support failure, and what I wound up doing was using a hot glue gun to re-glue the support to the base, and that worked out pretty well. The supports come off very nicely, turns out, and I'll try pulling these away. My first layer, this was the first time I was using this, so my first layer here was almost good. It needed a little more work. It needed to have a little extra extrusion. I was going a little faster than I should, as this is where I was adjusting to try to adapt to it. But it's still pretty good. But it could have squished down just a little bit more and could have had a little more overlap in the border. But it's still a nice first layer. And so I'm going to try to remove some of these supports here. And maybe I'll talk, maybe I'll just fast forward it. I did another video in real time of me removing the supports on the wood-based one, wood-colored one. So now I've got my forceps, which come in very, very handy. And we've got some nice interface areas. And some of these can be a little tricky to remove, well, maybe not so much. Trying to just get the easy ones off, like these little ones on the side. They come away very, very clean. This little one in the back, I may use pliers. Again, came away very clean. I'm looking forward to modifying the Artemis to accept dual extrusion like I have on my Rostock Max printer. But at the moment, boy, this is a nice print. Okay, let me just start picking away at it. Well, this is coming apart rather nicely. Just trying to pull out some big sections here using pliers and the forceps. That's a pretty clean eye socket. Turns out those words don't come up in conversation very much. Try not to lever the tools against part of the print that I want to keep. Although, depending on what I decide to rust, and the way you rust is by putting some paper towels on areas of the print, I think with water and salt and vinegar and maybe some other things. And when the thing is rusted, it may, get streaks and stuff like that. So even any imperfections in the print may just sort of disappear. But this supports are actually coming off very nicely. The print was sliced in Simplify 3D. Originally I had it set for a 75 millimeter speed for the print, and that was based on my testing on the regular PLA, but I knew that this would have to be slowed down a bit, and so I wound up having to slow it down during the print by slowing it down to about 50 or 55%, because at full speed the extruder was actually extruding, but the extruder was clicking. It was having difficulty and it was building up back pressure. So I slowed it down, and sometimes I actually changed the extrusion width to, the extrusion flow rate rather, to 110%. But then I switched it back to 100%. I decided to get a little towel here so when I put it upside down I don't damage the surface of the print. Nice thing about forceps is that they lock and they clamp in place, so you don't have to use a whole lot of force to hold on to a piece when you've got hold of it. Oh, one other thing that I did when printing the supports, although they've got this little zigzag pattern here, I told Simplify 3D that I wanted solid bases on it, which makes it much more likely to adhere to the bed. I could have also brought a brim around. I printed a skirt about 4 millimeters away from the part. I could have made a brim that would actually sort of put a wider foot on this to keep it from falling over. So here we are printing another version of the Maverick Skull, and I changed filament. I also changed the setting in Simplify 3D so that it creates a solid layer under the infill, under the supports. I'm using a filament I have not used before, and should be an interesting print. I changed the support settings in Simplify 3D to be able to handle a solid base, so hopefully they won't fall over like they did before. Got an interesting little thing going on here in this one in the front, but let's see what happens to it. I'm printing a little slower than I normally would because this is an unfamiliar filament. The bridging in here looks great. It's pretty smooth, and the supports did a great job with that. This is my second print of the Maverick Skull for the SeeMeCNC user group. challenge that was issued. And I'm using an unfamiliar filament, and so I'm playing a little bit with the temperatures and the speeds and such, but it's coming along. Like the earlier model, I had a failure on one of the supports, and so I managed to fix that. You can see that in the front with a little white area. I fixed it with a 3D printer pen. Very handy thing to have around. I also, on this one, made the supports have a solid base to try to help keep some of the supports from falling over. But the print is coming along. It's going to be a long time before it's ready. I'm printing it with 15% infill and 3 perimeters. So this is about 10 hours into the print. And there's still a way to go. I've slowed this down to accommodate this filament, but it seems to be working out okay. Looks like one support got knocked over on the left, but it seems to recover. And so I'm going to let this print overnight and see how it does. Well, there's light at the end of the tunnel. 18 hours into the print. I'm printing overnight. Just woke up. And it's moving right along here. So the Maverick print is finally done in this gray filament, and we'll talk about this filament a little later. And it turns out that it took 18 hours 46 minutes, and the speed factor was at 55%, and that's because this is the first time I'm using this filament. The last one I printed, this one over here, was at 75 millimeters a second, and this filament needed to be brought down substantially to 55% because it was causing the extruder to click. So let's see what this thing weighs. To recap, straight PLA weighed 221 or 220 grams. The magnetic iron PLA weighs 357 grams. $221, $357. Pretty gutsy piece here. And it turns out that there was 69 grams, just short of 70 grams of support material. The rules of this challenge call for no sanding. You can do some basic cleanup. And so I'll make some pictures of this for the challenge that shows the first layer and the top and all of that. And I've already taken pictures of the print in progress. But when I try to rust it, one of the things I need to do in order to promote the rust is just to scuff up the surface a little bit. And we'll see how that works out. But this is kind of weird. Coming over here to take a magnet and have filament stick to the magnet. This is a black ceramic rare earth magnet. And yeah, this is pretty interesting stuff. So I'm not going to use the magnetic properties of it, but because it's got iron particles in it, it should rust rather nicely. At least I hope so. Now you should be able to see just how nice and smooth a print this is. Again, this is with no fussing. You can see a little bit of the circles here in the very top layers, but the interlayer stuff is gorgeous. I may have a little bit of cleanup. There may be a couple of little pieces of support left in there, but I'm pretty happy with this print. It'd be hard for me to be happier with this print.